Most beginners in the gym focus on the wrong things first, but they forget about the actual things that build muscle. So today I'm breaking down the muscle growth pyramid from the most important foundations all the way up to the bonus stuff. This will save you months, even years of wasted effort. So let's go. So tier 1, you've got sleep and recovery. So when you go to the gym, you break down the muscle. All of the growth happens in the recovery, in your sleep, outside of the gym. And sleep is a massive part of this. Without proper sleep, you'll have lower testosterone and increased cortisol. All of this just means that you're gonna make less gains because testosterone, for example, is very important for muscle growth. So I'll give you an example. A couple years ago when I was going to the gym, I was waking up very early to go to the gym in the mornings before work, maybe at like 6 a.m, which by the way, is not that early, but for me it was early. The issue was that I was still going to sleep at the same time as what I would if I was going to the gym in the evening. And I'm not joking, for those 6 months that I was doing that, I did not make any gains. I noticed all of my lifts stayed the same. For example, my bench press, I bench pressed 100 kg just before I did all that. At the end of that, I was still bench pressing 100. So what should you be doing? Well, you want to aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep. That's a rough guide. Some people are a bit more, some people a bit less, but 7 to 9 hours is a good starting point. And within that, you want regular sleep-wake patterns. Your body likes routine. For example, if you're doing shift work, it's going to be very hard for your body to get into that routine, and recovery will be harder. I'm not saying it's impossible, but ideally you want to be in a constant sleep-wake pattern. And also a big one, which a lot of people really underappreciate, you want to limit your caffeine consumption. It's okay to have caffeine early in the day, but if you're having it, say, past 4 p.m, so for me, I go to bed at 11 p.m, so my cutoff for caffeine is 4 p.m. I know that sounds very early, but trust me, if you have it any later than that, it will affect your sleep. And a lot of people will say to me that they still sleep okay with having the same amount of caffeine. And they might think that, but their sleep quality won't be as good, which is what actually matters. And what else have you got in that? You've got rest days. So rest days are very important because that's when you do the most growth. You'll get to a point where if you're training so many days in a row, your body needs a break if you're actually training hard. People who are able to train every day of the week, I promise you, are not making the same progress. So take rest days. I recommend 2 rest days a week at least. So we talked about sleep and recovery. Now we're on to tier 2. Which is intensity and consistency. So let's say you're sleeping great. Next up, are you training hard enough, frequently enough, or long enough? The main thing here is progressive overload. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, it means adding either extra weight or sets or reps every week, because that way you're stimulating your muscles more, which means they're required to grow more. If you're lifting the same thing every week, your body doesn't need to adapt and overcome those hurdles. If you're constantly pushing yourself, your body knows it needs to produce more muscle in order to lift those weights. And you also need to be training sufficiently close to failure. Failure just means that you are not able to move that weight anymore. That's it. You need to be training. You don't want every set to be extremely close, if not past failure. And by past failure, I mean drop sets, etc. That's too much. That's called fatigue maxing. You don't want to be doing that. You just want to be training within 1 to 2 reps away from failure almost every set. And you'll find you can do a lot less sets if you train sufficiently close to failure on every set. Now, when it comes to training to failure, I used to make the mistake of doing every set to failure. Now, if you're doing 2 sets all out, that can work. However, if you're doing 3 or 4 sets, you run into the issue of your body that's too much for you. That's very taxing on your body to be going to failure that often. So 2 sets to failure per exercise is the max. And also I would consider only doing drop sets on your last exercise for that muscle group. For example, right, if you're doing chest press as your first chest exercise, you might find that if you go all out on that to failure and beyond, you might go to your next chest exercise and be so much weaker. That's not what you want. You want to be able to hit every set with the same intensity, pretty much. So don't overdo it, but sufficiently close to failure is the goal. It's also consistency over perfection. I promise you, if you go to the gym consistently for a year, you'll make a lot more progress than if you have a month off here and there, but at least when you're in that month, you are training hard. So consistency is way more important than perfection. Now, tier 3, we've got nutrition. Wow, my writing is so bad, I'm sorry. You can't out-train a bad diet, and you definitely can't grow if you're under eating. This is why when you're in a fat loss phase, you are likely to not gain any muscle, but when you're in a bulking phase, you also won't gain muscle if you're not eating enough. So for bulking, you need to be in a calorie surplus, which means you're consuming more calories than you're burning. So there's 2 parts of this. You've got bulking, which means you're consuming more calories than what you're burning. This gives your body the fuel to build more muscle. However, you want to be in a very slight surplus. The smaller surplus, the better, because the aim is to be in a calorie surplus for as long as possible, because that's when you make the most gains. So I recommend a 300 calorie surplus. Any more than that and you'll start to get fat. The other side of this is cutting. So that just means you're burning more calories than what you're consuming. This is great for a fat loss phase. So if you have been going through a bulk and you have gained a bit of fat, you want to then shave that fat off, and so you go through a cut. Again, for this, I'd recommend roughly a 300 calorie deficit max. That's it, that's all you need. You can work out what calorie deficit you need by going to one of these free calorie calculators online and then planning your meals accordingly. A big part of whether you're bulking or cutting is your protein intake. I recommend 1 gram per pound of body weight. I recommend that for bulking or cutting, but when you're cutting, it's especially important because you've worked so hard to build that muscle while you're bulking. So when you're cutting, you want to keep as much muscle as you can. So by eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, your body will hold on to that muscle. For me, for example, I'm eating about 190 grams of protein a day. I weigh about 180 pounds, but just to be on the safe side, I'm cutting, and so I'm eating 190 grams of protein a day. And I've noticed that I've definitely kept the muscle despite being 6 kilos down. What I would say is meal timing doesn't matter as much as people think. However, I would try and spread your protein out throughout the day and then have a fair amount of carbs before your workouts. That way your body is constantly going to be going through protein synthesis, and you've also got the fuel you need for your workouts. So, tier 4. Here we have supplements. This is where most beginners start, and it's also where most people waste their money. Now you'll notice as we're going up this board, things become less and less important. Supplements is one of those things that can definitely help. However, it should not be one of the foundational pillars of muscle growth. It should be that little cherry on top, although cherry on top will be the next tier, but you get what I'm saying. Supplements are the thing that might add the extra 2%, which if you're taking the gym very seriously, then you can consider. So there's 3 that I would actually recommend. First of all, you have creatine. Secondly, you have caffeine. And then third, you have protein powder. So creatine, your body naturally produces creatine. By supplementing it, you just add that little bit extra. So what creatine does is that it increases the amount of water you store in your muscles, which leads to greater muscle growth because you have greater nutrient delivery to those muscles. There's also things apparently like it gives cognitive benefits. However, I don't know if that's true, but definitely about storing more water in your muscles. People say it makes you look fluffy. That's not the case. That's not true because the water goes to the muscles, which is where you want it. If it was going to fat, then fair enough. But no, it's going to your muscles, which is where you want it. And creatine is very cheap nowadays. I recommend taking it in a powder because these creatine gummies, there's been studies to show that a lot of them don't contain what they actually say. At least with the powder, you know roughly what you're getting. And caffeine for me is very important. It's not essential for everyone. However, I find that I can get the most out of my sessions if I take some form of caffeine beforehand. I like to take pre-workout. Coffee will do. However, like I said earlier, I would take caffeine no closer than 7 hours before you go to sleep. Unless you want to impact your recovery, and then go ahead. And then the last supplement, we've got protein powder. This one's kind of self-explanatory, but essentially, if in the nutrition you're not getting enough protein from food, then you can add protein powder in after to just top that protein up. Although I really would try and get all your protein from food because it's a better source of protein. The things that I'd advise against are fat burners, BCAAs, and any other sort of magic powder that people claim that you need. Those things are likely to make little to no difference. The only caveat to that is if you train fasted in the morning, as in you don't eat before your sessions and you train early in the morning, potentially BCAAs are going to be good because they contain amino acids, which can keep the muscle, rather than if you train fast and you've got nothing in your system, you can potentially go catabolic, which means breaking down muscle because you've got no protein in your body. But other than that, stay away from those. And then in tier 5, which is the final tier, we have optimization. This stuff makes 5% difference, but beginners treat it like it's 95%. So some examples of optimization, we've got tempo. This means controlling the weight, controlling the pause, controlling the stretch, all of that. I do think that's very important. However, it's a way of polishing up your training rather than the actual foundation of it. In this, you've also got drop sets. Again, very useful if you want to try and add a bit more volume. However, you can potentially go into fatigue maxing with that, so be careful. It's not essential, but it can add a little bit of extra intensity should you need it for progressive overload. And in this, you've got nutrient timing. And by this, I mean the time you have your protein, the time you have your carbs. So I touched on this earlier, but try and spread your protein throughout the day, definitely before and after a workout, and carbs mainly before and after a workout, because then you fuel your workout for energy and then you also replenish the glycogen stores that you depleted during your workout. I want to make it very clear, these things in the optimization tier are not bad, they're just not essential, and they're definitely not worth stressing over if you haven't got everything else down here up to scratch. So if you've been training consistently and got everything down here locked in, then go for it. But don't let this stuff distract you. So here's a full pyramid. If you're struggling to build muscle, start at the bottom. Sleep, train, eat enough. Then, and only then, think about working your way up. Let me know in the comments, which tier are you focusing on right now? And if you want any help with this, I've got links in the description for my free 30 ways in 30 days to maximize your gym gains, and also my online coaching. Drop a like on this video if it's helped you, and subscribe for more content like this. I'll catch you in the next one.